Welcome everyone. This is the National Crime Victim Rights Week Community Awareness Applicants webinar. Welcome, my name's Steve Doreen. You can see people are still logging on, but we'll get this started. This year we do have captions, and there's a website with a link on your screen. If you wish to view the captions, you need to open up an additional window, and then you can arrange that on your desktop at your convenience. My name is Steve Doreen. I'm Executive Director of the National Association of VOCA Assistance Administrators, NAVAA. We administer the Crime Victim Rights Week Community Awareness Projects on behalf of the Office for Victims of Crime. Very briefly, NAVAA is a national nonprofit organization. Our membership are the state agencies in every state and jurisdiction that administers the VOCA Victims of Crime Act Victim Assistance Formula grants. Also joining us will be the project director for the community awareness projects, Kathy Buckley. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. I have to say that after participating in National Crime Victims Rights Week activities, both at the local and state level, it's an honor to be participating in this project at the national level. In saying that, I'm really looking forward to seeing the applications that are going to be submitted and the various ways that victims and survivors will be honored during National Crime Victims Rights Week in 2019. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Kathy, as project director, will be responsible for the overall management and administration of the projects, and those who are funded will be in touch with Kathy quite a bit regarding budgetary and other aspects to carrying out the projects. Also joining us is our technical consultant, Ann Seymour, who has been involved with National Crime Victim Rights Week, I believe, since its inception. Ann?
Since forever. Good afternoon, everybody. I am so glad to see so many people joining this webinar and really encourage you to follow through with the grant applications. National Crime Victims Rights Week is the one time a year that all of us get to join together to promote rights and services for all survivors of crime. And I have a lot of favorite things that I get to work on as a victim advocate. This project is absolutely at the top of my favorites because it really, I think it really has powerful impact in the community. So I will be working with you all. My job is to make your jobs easy. You tell me what you need in terms of public awareness, and hopefully I'll be able to assist you. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Ann. And also joining us is Emily Baumfield. She is the grant manager for the Office for Victims of Crime. Emily?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Steve said, I'm the grant manager on the overall grant, and I work mainly with Steve and Kathy and Ann, and I'm very excited to see the types of projects that come in this year. So back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Emily. We have a great team, and over the years we've helped many community projects carry out their projects during Crime Victim Rights Week, and I think those of you who are participating this year will enjoy working with us. Just a quick housekeeping. We have quite a few people signed up, so everybody is muted. We do hope to have time to take your questions at the end of the presentation, and you'll see a questions panel on your control box. You can use that to write questions during the presentation, and as I said, we'll try to take them up if we haven't covered the topics during the presentation at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting a recording of the webinar along with the PowerPoint slides and a transcript shortly after the conclusion of the webinar, sometime later today or no later than tomorrow. If you happen to have a need to say something, or maybe when we get to the questions, you need some clarification, You should see a raise hand icon on your control panel. That will alert me to unmute you, and we can have a discussion if necessary. A few ground rules. This is a competitive process. We usually get 2 to 3 times the amount of requests than we're able to support, so we want to be fair to everyone. We keep all of the relevant information is available on the website, in the applicant guide, which I'll be referring to frequently during the presentation in this webinar. So we want everybody to have access to the same information, and we're not really able to comment on any specific application or proposal. We can answer technical questions, but everything that you need is really available, as I said, on the website, especially in the applicant guide and the posting of the recording of this webinar. The applicant guide, we've really developed that every year to help you avoid making problems or running into issues later on. It is, I think, your best tool for creating strong applications. Here's the agenda for today's presentation. We'll be covering some background information, general application instructions, section by section instructions, what's allowable and what's not allowable as costs for the projects. We'll give you an overview of how applications will be scored and selected, and then some technical information, and we'll be able to take some questions from you if time permits. So background information, as I said, this is a project administered by NAVAA under a cooperative agreement with OVC, which means that OVC, we work in partnership with them. As you heard from Emily, we're in close communication if issues come up or other matters that we need to work in conjunction with OVC. We are carrying this out on their behalf. We have a website, cap.navaa.org, where all the information is available. It is used especially after the selection to keep selected projects up to date with information. This year we've increased the maximum amount of the reimbursement under this project to $6,000. Previously, the maximum was $5,000, but over the years, costs increase and what have you, so we are raising that limit to $6,000 per project. And with that amount, we expect to be funding at least 80 projects. Usually, we're able to fund more than that because not every application requests the maximum amount. So it could be somewhat more than 80 projects. This is very important. The purpose of this program is to increase the general public's awareness of rights and services for victims of all types of crime in conjunction with National Crime Victim Rights Week, which in 2019 will be the week of April 7th to the 13th. I've highlighted what I think are the important factors that you should keep in mind in putting together your projects and writing your applications. The purpose is to increase the general public's awareness, not specific targets, specific or limited audiences, but the general public. We like to see projects appeal to the greatest extent to victims of all types of crime during or close to Crime Victim Rights Week. So keep those in mind as you draft your applications. The types of things that we generally fund are public events, which are open to the public, and they're in person, so people are physically present. Sometimes people get confused about that. We also support mass or social media advertisement, the production of printed materials, and promotional giveaway items. All of those have to relate to National Crime Victim Rights Week. The projects are not intended to support training or professional development or self-defense classes or things that by its nature are inherently limited and not generally available to the public. Even though the public may be technically invited, we know that they are really targeted for a smaller audience. We are not funding ongoing activities, so things that go on for several months or the year or permanently are not supported. And again, the focus is on National Crime Victim Rights Week. We realize there are other observations or commemorations during this period, but the focus has got to be on National Crime Victim Rights Week. There have been occasions in the past where we'll get a proposal, we'll agree to fund it, and it turns out that the project is really targeted for something other than Crime Victim Rights Week. And in some cases, we've been unable to reimburse those projects because it was a significant deviation from the intent. The eligibility to apply, public or governmental agencies are able to apply, nonprofit organizations, community-based victim service organizations, faith-based organizations, tribal organizations, and community coalitions. Individual persons or for-profit organizations are not eligible to apply. If an individual has a great idea, we'd suggest they work with a eligible organization in order to implement that idea, but we cannot provide funding directly to individuals or to for-profit organizations. Nonprofits, you do not have to be 501c3. That's not a formal requirement, which relates to federal tax exemption. But you must have a DUNS number, sometimes referred to now as a unique entity identifier. Those are 9 digits. It's not the same as an organization's taxpayer information number or employer information number. Those typically have 2 digits followed by a hyphen and 7 numbers. These are just 9 digits. If you don't have one, one is available at no cost through the website that's shown here, fedgov.ndnb.com/webform. That's a federal requirement. All entities other than community coalition groups must have a DUNS number in order to receive federal funds. Organizations that have previously received funding from us or their major partners in projects are eligible to reapply, although you'll see in our scoring system, we do give preference to new or other recipients who have not received funding recently. This is our anticipated timeline. The important date here for you, or for these purposes, is Friday night, November 2nd, 2018. That's the deadline by which we must have received your application. We will be acknowledging receipt of applications, so we encourage you to submit it as early as you can, because if there's some problems, some technical problems with email or what have you, and it gets to us beyond that deadline, we won't be able to consider it. So be sure to submit it as soon as you can. If you don't receive an acknowledgement from us within 3 days, be sure and get in touch with us. The final decisions will be made by OVC. We will make recommendations to them probably by mid-December and hope to have final decisions by late December. There's no guarantee about that, but we do appreciate the fact that there's a very short time period between the date we can inform applications of whether they're being funded and Victim Rights Week. So we will try to expedite that as much as possible. Everyone will get notified whether or not they're being funded, so hopefully you won't be left up in the air wondering. It's happened in the past that our communications have failed, so if you don't hear from us, say by early January, please contact us and we'll let you know what the status of the decisions are. Now for some general application instructions. Again, the applications are available through our website. There's a link on the left-hand side that says applications. You have to use those applications. They come in either PDF or Word format, and each of those are in either computer fillable format, or you can download it and fill it out hopefully legibly by hand, or if anybody still uses typewriters, you can use a typewriter. There's also the Applicants Guide. Again, I can't emphasize enough that you need to refer to that as you prepare your application. It contains a lot more information, a lot more detail than we can cover here. And it really is a requirement that you look that over in preparation for your application. You have to use the forms we provide. Don't try to duplicate or copy the forms or use forms from previous years. Only the ones that you're downloading. If anybody has downloaded the fillable PDF before today, there was a technical problem with one of the years. We'll go over this in a minute. So if you've done that and if you've run into a problem, you could download a copy today that doesn't have that problem. I'll show you that in a second. It's important that you complete all sections of the application. It's a short 4-page application, and we will not consider any additional pages, attachments, or letters of support. So don't ask for anybody to send in an additional letter or attach any other information. Those will simply be ignored. You should copy and retain a copy of it. And again, the deadline is Friday night, November 2nd. As I said, we will acknowledge receipt within 3 working days, and you should let us know if you submitted it and you didn't get the acknowledgement. Some more tips. Again, follow the guide. Each section, each narrative question, there's a word limitation, so you should not exceed that. You can, if you want, write the narrative out on another, say, word processing program and then copy and paste that into the form. However, we strongly suggest you don't use any fancy formatting or bullets or characters, because those don't usually come over very well into these formats. So try to keep it as simple and as straightforward as you can. The way I put it is avoid unnecessary superlatives. There's not a lot of space, there's not a lot of words, so be very concise, straightforward. Don't tell us how wonderful you are. We know you're all wonderful. Get right to the point. We really want to focus on what we're proposing to do and what our funds are going to be used for. Don't provide additional information. A lot of times the projects you're proposing under this solicitation is part of a larger package of Victim Rights Week activities. That's very well and good. We encourage that, but for the purposes of this project, just focus on what we are funding. Also be very mindful about what is and is not allowable. We'll go over those in a while, but it's very important, particularly in terms of some of the terminology that you use. So, for example, we're not allowed to fund food or beverages. And if you're planning an event, say at noon, and somebody's going to donate food and beverages, that may be very appropriate. Don't necessarily call that a luncheon, because that's going to call attention to the fact that there's food and beverages, and somebody may question that. You may want to have an event at which you invite local public policy makers, and you want to educate them about the importance of victims' rights. Well, if you're going to be talking about specific legislation or policy, be careful that that doesn't raise a question about whether you're using the money to lobby, because lobbying is not allowable. And finally, please check and recheck your math. You'd be amazed at how many math errors we come across, and we'll be going over that in a minute. But we actually check that, and if some of these things are not done properly, your application may actually lose some points in scoring if you have some math errors or other technical problems. So those are just some suggestions that we've learned from previous years on things that have been done. We'll now spend a little time going over each section of the application. Again, we try to keep this very targeted and simple for you to fill out and for the reviewers to read and review. So in section 1, you can see there's a section for the applicant agency. This is very important. The applicant agency is going to be the entity that we end up, if we're funding you, that we're going to be entering into a legal contract with. So keep that in mind. And also when you enter the name, don't use unnecessary abbreviations unless that's part of your legal title. Don't use also known as or doing business as. Try to keep it as short as possible. Also, don't use simply generic terms like victim assistance program. There are dozens of victim assistance programs. You might want to call it, the Smith County Victim Assistance Program, something that's more descriptive. The DUNS number I mentioned, we have to have that in there. That is a requirement. So if you don't have one yet, be sure and get one. Finally, but we're asking for the name of your contact. We're going to be using that contact person as the sole person that we will communicate with regarding your application, and if you're successful, the funded project. That person would be responsible if you have other people in your agency or other agencies you work with who need to know the information. The person you list here as contact will be responsible for disseminating that information to whoever needs it within that project. We also need that person's email address. Virtually all of our communications is done by email. So we need an accurate, valid email address for the contact person. If during the course of a project that person changes, we need to know that with an updated contact and email address. And finally, on this section, we ask you to enter in the amount requested. That will be the same number that you'll enter in under the total project cost in section 3 for the budget. You'd be amazed how many applications we get where this is left blank or it's a different number. And as I said before, it's possible your application may lose some points if you fail to fill these things in correctly. So just transfer the number from the total project cost in section 3 to this box on page 1. The middle section of the first page has some technical information we need. Indicate the type of organization. Virtually every application we get is going to fall into one of these categories. The other category should rarely be chosen. We've had situations where somebody's put in under other sexual assault services. Well, that may not be sufficient. You may be a nonprofit or a governmental agencies. You should indicate that. So it would be very rare for any applicant to actually choose other, even though we provide that option. The next two questions are very important. These are federally required questions. The first question asks if your agency is suspended or debarred. We will have to follow up on that and check on that. And the next question asks if there's any confidentiality agreements that prohibit employees or others from reporting fraud, waste, and abuse. Be careful. Some people read that question, they see the term confidentiality and assume they know the answer. If yes is chosen in either of those, we will not be allowed to provide funding to you. So be very careful and read those questions closely. The next section asks if your agency or one of your major partners has previously received CAP funding. If the answer is yes, please indicate the years in which they were funded. There was a technical problem on one form that's been corrected where if you selected 2010, it would select both 2010 and 2011. As I said, that form has now been corrected. There is on our website a link that says previous recipients. If you're not sure, you can go to that page on our website and there's a listing of all the previous recipients. There's one document there that lists everyone by state and city, so you can research that and correctly answer this question. Finally, on page 1 at the bottom, we ask for a brief description of your agency's experience in providing, advocating victim rights and services. Provide some dates as to when you were organized, when you started providing various services, what have you. Just a summary of your agency's experience in that respect. Section 2 is very important. That's where you're going to tell us what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and who you're going to target. We ask for specific dates of when activities are going to be carried out. That does not include dates for planning of activities, but the actual implementation, which our audiences are being targeted, what geographic areas are being targeted, and if it's an event where people will be attending, what your estimated attendance will be. It's very important that your description here relates very logically to the items you're going to be requesting in the budget. In other words, we should be able to say, okay, you're planning to do, say, a candlelight vigil. Let's look at the items in the budget that will support that event. And conversely, when you do the budget, there should be items in there that we can relate to what you're planning to do. Again, it should be very simple, it should be very straightforward, but there needs to be a logical connection between what you say you're going to do and the funds you're going to be using. And the next section is the budget. Again, we're only focusing on the use of the federal funds. There shouldn't be anything here which reflects donations. There shouldn't be any line where the amount is zero. It's only the use of the federal funds. So for example, let's say you want to order some buttons. Let's say you want to order 1,000 buttons. The unit, the quantity, say, is 1,000. The unit cost is 10 cents a piece. That equals $100. Notice, the quantity times the unit cost equals the amount. Believe me, we see some really obvious math errors, and that will probably result in a reduction in the score for the application. So be very careful as you do this. This is why I said earlier, check your math. Now let's say you're ordering the buttons and there's a separate setup and shipping charge. You can either include that on a separate line, or if you wanted to, you can incorporate that within the unit cost. So here, for example, if the setup and shipping is $20, that would increase the unit cost from 10 cents to 12 cents. You can show us that there. It just has to be something that we can see how it's being calculated. Again, let's say you needed 200 candles for a vigil that cost 5 cents a piece. That's $10. But let's say the candles come in boxes of 100, so you want 2 boxes of candles, 100 in each box. That's 2 boxes at $5 a piece. Again, just be sure it's something that we can understand and calculate and see the math so it adds up correctly. Near the bottom of that page, you'll see a line that says total direct costs. That'll be the sum of all of the amounts. You can round the dollars into whole dollars. We don't allow or want you to put in cents, so we understand that in doing the calculation, and the total direct costs should be added on that line. I'll talk about indirect costs in a moment, but also at the bottom of that page is space for you to show us any other calculations or explanations as to how you arrived at the money. Just remember, again, from our point of view, we want to be able to understand what you're using the funds for, how it relates to the things you said you're going to do, and that we can then see the calculation as to how you arrived at that dollar amount. Okay, as far as indirect costs go, that's something government allows subrecipients to request. You have your choice. If your agency has a currently approved federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you can use that. If your agency has never had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you can choose up to 10%. It's referred to as a de minimis rate, or you can choose not to request indirect costs. So those are your 3 options. Choosing to request indirect cost rates does not increase the $6,000 max. That's important, so you understand that indirect costs will come from the $6,000 max and not in addition to it. If you do choose indirect costs, here's what you need to do. First, enter the dollar or the percentage amount in the space provided for rate. That's a percentage amount. If you enter an amount in there, look at the bottom where you're certifying that you have a indirect cost rate, and you'll be required to submit a copy of that, or that you're eligible and elect to charge the de minimis rate. So once there's an amount in that line, that indicates that certification. Then you need to indicate whether the percentage is the federally approved rate or the de minimis rate. So for example, let's say your total direct cost totals $5,400. You've chosen the 10% de minimis rate. That's $540. So it's 10% of the total direct costs, not 10% of the $6,000 maximum. In the past, we've seen some proposals where they simply think the indirect costs can be used to sort of top off the amount to get to the maximum. It doesn't work that way. That percentage will be used to calculate an indirect cost rate, even if at the end of the project you end up spending less than your budget. So if, let's say, in this example, you actually ended up spending $5,000, which happens quite frequently, then we'll apply the 10% or $500 as your indirect cost. So bear that in mind when you're trying to figure out indirect costs. It's not easy, I understand that, but that's the way it's going to work. If you're not requesting any indirect costs, that's fine. Just leave the line blank. Don't enter in any rates or check any boxes or enter a dollar amount in that line. Just leave it blank if you're not requesting it. The next section asks for three things. The first one is a description or explanation of how you intend to incorporate the National Crime Victim Rights Week theme, logo, and colors. We know the theme. It's honoring our past, creating hope for the future. We do not yet know what the colors, or if there'll be a logo, what that will be. That may not be available for a couple of weeks. Nevertheless, we expect you to indicate to us how you intend to use those in your project, whether it's by incorporating it into your printed materials or public service announcements or on the billboards or somehow or other. It has to relate to Crime Victim Rights Week. We will be checking that at the end of the projects. There have been times when we've been unable to reimburse parts or all of a project because although they've told us they were going to incorporate these elements, they never did. So that's something that you need to think through and explain to us what your intent will be. The second section asks you to list the major partners or collaborative organizations and how they intend to contribute to this specific project. We're not looking for general letters of support that you're a great agency, but specifically what they're going to do to help plan and implement this project. And finally, some description of how you will be involving victims or survivors in the planning and implementation of the project. The last section is a certification. Somebody for your agency who's authorized to do so needs to sign the application, enter the printed name, their title, the date. They could either sign it, handwritten signature, or there's a provision for an electronic signature by just clicking and putting an X in that box. So that's it. It's a 4-page application. Once you have it completed, you can send it to us either by email to cap@navaa.org. On the PDF fill-in form, there's a button there. You can click that. It'll launch your email application and attach the application to that. Or if you want to mail it or FedEx it, ship it to us. The address is 5702 Old Sauk Road, Madison, Wisconsin, 53705. And again, the application must be received by 11:59 Eastern Time, Friday, November 2nd, 2018. Okay, now we'll go through some of the allowable and unallowable costs. Allowable costs include the production and purchase of mass or social media, production, distribution of printed materials, or promotional giveaway items. Again, These must all relate to Crime Victim Rights Week, so they have to include, say, National Crime Victim Rights Week with the dates, the use of the colors, the theme, the logo. That is something we'll be asking you to document that you've done in order to get reimbursement. The cost for those items, particularly the giveaway items, cannot exceed $20 per unit, including any setup and shipping charges. Recognition awards, usually they're certificates or simple plaques that are given out. Those cannot exceed $50 each, again, including setup and shipping. We will pay for a reasonable amount for design costs. However, keep in mind those have to be in some relationship to what it is we're paying for, what the product is. So don't ask us to pay $1,000 to design a $10 certificate. Event speakers, we will pay a speaker's fee. If you want to invite speakers, if you know who they are at this time, please identify them in the description. Separate out the speaker fee from other speaker-related costs in your budget, because the speaker fee cannot exceed $650 a day total. And by total, we mean including non-federal funds. So you can't, say, charge this project $650 and then get another $150 from someone else to supplement that fee. That's a federal requirement that requires us to limit the amount for their fee. The fee can include some reasonable time for preparation and travel. And in addition to the fee for the speaker's time, you can pay a reasonable amount for their travel expenses. If your agency has a travel policy, it has to adhere to that, but it cannot exceed federal travel regulations. The federal travel regulations, which varies from location to location, is available from the GSA website at www.gsa.gov/per diem. So you need to check that if you intend to pay for travel costs for speakers. Consumable supplies and commodities, Scotch tape and candles and things like that. Equipment, which is anything that has an expected life of more than 1 year. We will not pay to purchase the equipment. Typically, you can borrow or get donated equipment. If you're expecting us to purchase something for you, you have to show us that it's more economical to purchase than to rent or lease the item. Space and AV costs. Federal rules limit that to $25 per person per day. That's the combined cost for both the space and the AV. You don't need to go through a big formal elaborate solicitation and bid process, but you should be able to document that you've checked out at least 3 facilities for the most economical cost to rent space. It could be ads in the paper or emails that you've solicited people's quotes from or what have you. And then there's the indirect costs, which we've gone over. Unallowable costs. We won't pay for your agency salaries or staff time. As I said, food, beverages, or refreshments cannot be charged to this account. If you get donated food or beverages, it's very important that that be disclosed, that you have, let's say in your program, a statement that the food has not been paid for with federal funds, or you could put little signs on the table indicating that, but you need to be clear that food and beverages were not paid for with federal funds. Entertainment costs are not allowable, and that includes things that you might want to use to attract people to come to your event, such as bands or DJs, bounce houses for kid activities and things like that are things that we can't fund. It is okay if there's a small, reasonable amount, say as a stipend or honoraria to a choir, say, to sing at a candlelight vigil. But other than that, entertainment expenses cannot be funded. Similarly, we won't pay for fundraising activities, and I strongly urge you to look at the applicant guide because there are examples there of things that are fundraising related activities that we're not allowed to support, even if it's in conjunction with some other activity that is allowable. So let's say we're paying you to create a web page and you put a donate button on there. That could render the whole web page ineligible. I mentioned before lobbying, that's also not allowable. Bar charges, monetary gifts, cash prizes or gift cards. Gift cards would be acceptable, say, in lieu of cash for something that would otherwise be allowable. So let's say you have some victims speaking at an event and you want to give them a small honoraria. You could give that to them in the form of a gift card rather than cash. And also, I mentioned this earlier, trainings, professional development, self-defense, which are really targeted to a small group. We won't pay for continuing education credits and the like. So even if you get something in the budget and it gets by us and it turns out that it's not allowable, we won't be able to reimburse you for it, even if we've already approved the budget. With that, we'll turn to the scoring and selection. We have a committee that will review and grade every application. We break the committee up into teams and we get together as a group and make recommendations to OVC. Each section of the application gets a score. The experience section gets 5 points. Your description is 30 points. Budget is 25. The use of the theme, logo, and colors is 20. Partnerships are 10, and victim survivor involvement is also 10 points. Once we go through the scoring and the applications get ranked, there are some additional considerations that we may apply. For example, we have a goal of trying to fund at least one project in every state. We give preference to new or not recently funded projects, and then we'll look at the extent to which project addresses rights and services to victims of all types of crime. So even though you may want to focus on just one or two categories of crime victims, you can certainly apply. We're just saying that the strength of that application may be not as strong as another application that is serving a larger population of victims. So that's a relative matter. But we will, in putting together the package, apply those factors in the final recommendations to OVC. As I said, we hope to have the decisions by late December. The actual date is beyond our control. It's really up to OVC when they decide on approving or not approving our recommendations. But we will let everyone know of whether or not they're being funded as early as we can let you know. Finally, as far as technical assistance, Anne provides technical assistance. We have a subgrantees only website. We have a listserv for subgrantees that both of those we use to communicate with everyone. We send out notices, reminders, new developments, say when the resource guide is available, or other events or information that we think would be useful to you. Anne is also available for some individual consultations on your projects, and she prepares a series of bulletins we call them CAP tips. That is the current list of CAP tips are sent to the current subgrantees. The previously released ones are available to everybody off our website. There's a link that says CAP tips. Click that and you can see all of the previous CAP tips. There's a wealth of information there. And then finally, OVC produces a resource guide. This is critical, and many of you will depend on this for much of the information. It contains sample speeches, press releases, historical information, and what seems to be most valuable is the artwork that's provided. That usually can be customized. A lot of the items can be localized with your agency's name and contact information. There's also a theme video that you can use at different events and a theme poster that you can use. You can see there the email address or the website to get on their email address so that you'll get notice when that material becomes available. We hope it'll be available in early 2019. And please keep in mind, we do not produce or distribute the resource guide. As much as it's part of the projects that we're supporting, we don't have any control as to when that becomes available. But we'll let you know as soon as it is, and we'll try to work with you in adapting that information to your projects. So with that, I'm going to turn to questions. We have a few questions here. I have one where it's a partial question. From Jennifer Baker. It just says, I downloaded the fillable form and the amount requested only allowed. I don't know, Jennifer, are you on? Can you raise your hand and I can unmute you because your question seems to drop off. Oh, here it is. I downloaded the fillable form and the amount requested only allowed for $5,000. Jennifer, if you can email me, maybe you're using an old form. I will check that out and look into that. But all the forms should be updated to allow for $6,000. The next question, we are a community coalition, but also a 501c3. Which should we check off for type of organization? And do we need a DUNS number since we are a 501c3? If you're a coalition, I have a feeling that you're not really a community coalition if you have a 501c3 because that means you're a single entity. You may be called a coalition. I would suggest that if you have a 501c3, you're probably a non-profit and should check that, in which case you do need a DUNS number. If you decide you are truly a community coalition and not a nonprofit, then you do not need a DUNS number. Next question says, are partners a requirement or encouraged? Partners are encouraged, certainly, and as we went over, you'll be scored on the extent to which you are using partners. So that's a consideration to think about. If you don't have partners, you may lose, get a lower score. Next question. Does the donation of funds for NCVRW by local agencies impact the awarding of a sub-grant? Can those local donation funds be used to cover other costs associated with events? Certainly donations would be a form of partnership, and you should describe that in that section of the application, so that would strengthen the application. Can those local donation funds be used for other costs associated with events? If they're not being used for the events that we are being asked to fund, then the answer is no. Yes, you can use it for that, but then don't count that as a partnership or a donation to this event. If it's not going to be associated with events that we're funding, then we don't even want to know about it. I'm not sure what this next question is. It says allowed for 5,000. Okay, I have several comments here about the word fillable form allowing 5,000. I'll take a look at that as soon as this webinar is finished and correct that if that is in fact the case. We just got approval to raise the maximum to $6,000, so we may have overlooked correcting that particular form. I would suggest that You give me a few minutes after the webinar, and I will upload a corrected copy since that seems to be the case. So I'll skip over these other ones that relate to the $5,000. Next question, we publish resource guides on a variety of crime-related issues. Could these funds be used to create and print new guides, say Spanish? I don't want to comment on what you specifically may want to propose. All I can say is if you feel it's appropriate for this project, then you can request it. Again, keep in mind the purpose of this project is to focus on Crime Victim Rights Week and not merely to supply or replenish supplies of ongoing materials that your agency uses. And we will be looking at how that relates to Crime Victim Rights Week. Next question, if there are certain requested items not to be covered, will the entire proposal be thrown out, or will the board still consider I'm not seeing the entire question. Well, I will say that there certainly are situations where we've approved a project, but certain particular line items may be unallowable. What we typically will do there if we want to fund the project is follow up with the agency and suggest that they move those items to an allowable item. Again, it may depend on how much of the money is involved in that, but if it's just one or two items, we certainly would still consider the proposal. Next question, if we partner with a child abuse awareness but still have NCVRW as a large part of the event, be okay? Well, again, that's sort of a relative judgment, and again, I think we'd have to consider the overall project and the extent to which it's focusing on National Crime Victim Rights Week. I would just warn that in the past we've had situations where a proposal has tried to suggest they were going to use Crime Victim Rights Week, and when we actually see what was produced, that became a negligible part. It became very apparent that the true purpose wasn't to focus on Crime Victim Rights Week. So I can't really answer that definitively without seeing what actually is being done or proposed. Another question, are permits for the event an allowable expense? Yes, the answer, if you can justify that, where let's say there's something in a city park and the park requires a permit that costs some money, we have funded those things in the past. Okay, that's all of the questions that I have right now. I will take a look at the Word format and see whether we overlooked updating that, and if so, check back in, I would say, less than an hour, and you might want to re-download a corrected copy of that. And with that, I want to thank you for your time and look forward to your submitting proposals. Again, we will be posting a recording of the webinar on our website, hopefully later today or no later than tomorrow. Thanks very much, and good luck with your applications.